aim at the business of writing and the business of publishing, I should just ask you one or two questions to see how this wonderful image that you project of exaggerations and perversions in the field of narrative non-fiction, how we Earthlings could try and use that imagination in writing, translating, publishing narrative non-fiction. For example, I asked myself, looking at your project Sirens, this imaginary news website, the database Cassandra, the idea of the long con, how do you finish a project? How do you shape a project in a form that is well, more or less transferable or even marketable?
Yeah, it's been an interesting process editing. I mean, we've only done, I think, about 15 pieces so far, and it's operating within a classic sort of challenge of any art form, where when you have this broad canvas, you have a situation where anything is possible. And as you all know, when anything is possible, almost nothing is possible. We need rules to create, don't we?
And constraints.
Yeah, you need constraints. The haiku, the villanelle, poetry is full of these constraints. Part of the power of the physical book is that it is something that doesn't make sense to produce at 16 pages and doesn't make sense to produce at 5,000 pages, but does make sense to produce at between 250 and 400 pages. And we've built an entire mode of knowledge and entertainment around the arbitrary constraint of the manufacturing process of print. So in Sirens, part of the challenge is sort of everything is possible, and so we have to set up a few rules. One of the rules that is a useful rule is it has to happen exactly 7 years in the future. But the other rule becomes a little bit more complicated, and you start to get into the weeds of figuring out how to function as a useful editor in these situations. And one example I have is of a piece called 36 Hours in Detroit, which is modeled on a series of travel pieces that are done in the New York Times. Somebody spends 36 hours in a city and, eats certain food, goes to the certain restaurants.
Parachute journalists.
Pure parachute journalism, exactly. And so we're basically mimicking this particular conceit, and he's going to Detroit in 2022. And the concept there is that Detroit, much like, say, Williamsburg or the Docklands in London, is now super hip. Everybody's gone there. There are nightclubs, and there is Detroit's equivalent of the High Line, which is a park in New York City that was converted from an above-ground freight train line that those of you who go to Book Expo America will have an opportunity to go on a very pleasant walk along these days. But we're pretending that this exists in Detroit in 2022. And the writer imagined that there was a Jeff Koons sculpture on this High Line of a naked, reclining Lee Iacocca. Lee Iacocca was the iconic chairman of the Chrysler Corporation in the 1980s, a kind of a larger-than-life businessman. And I have to say, I sort of looked at it, I was like, there may very well be a Jeff Koons sculpture on the High Line, but a naked, reclining Jeff Koons is too good to be true. Let's try a more boring version of a 1955 Chevy that's oversized and long. He's like, that's so boring. I was like, I'm sorry, it will be truer. And that's the kind of, that's, and I'm offering an anecdote that shows me in a good light. And I know that there will be times, at times I still wonder if that glued together Dave Eggers' essay collection is too good to be true. I'm desperately hoping he will actually do it. So I turn out not to have been fooled by my own desire to have a fun story to tell at a nonfiction conference in Amsterdam. But I think there's, I think in some ways it's kind of the opposite of going after the exaggerations and perversions. You sort of go, you try to explore them in order to be able to see from 30,000 feet. But when you're down in the forest, you have to kind of become very boring and pedantic and slow and kind of stupid. As a consultant, I'm working on this crazy project where I'm the editor-in-chief of a biotech startup, the details of which I'm not going to go into, but I have to edit about 100 different stories that are profiles of genes by popular science writers, and I know nothing about this topic, but what I've tried to do is use my own stupidity as a way to be a productive editor. To always ask the stupid questions of the writer, to not be afraid to ask the embarrassing question. And I do think that's useful. I mean, I think Anand's and Olivia's conversation yesterday provides all kinds of little examples of some of the tricks we have to use to change frames, right? I mean, one of the interesting points that I do think is worth making is that, yes, a Westerner can never understand the East, let's say, but it is also true that does the self ever actually understand the own self? If you flip the self and the other, can it be said that that your friend in who's now in Dubai truly understands her own self? I think you have to be humble about how much you understand her, but I think you're entitled to a certain kind of super careful arrogance around how you may have a perspective to offer that is not visible. We see that so much in our own interpersonal lives. And I think an editor-writer role can be very productive, provided you're willing to ask a dumb question that makes it look like you know sweet fuck all about the Arab world. To ask a dumb question about the Congo.
I have a very dumb question.
Yeah.
How does Sirens earn money?
Oh, so Sirens, right? Somebody asked me yesterday, what's a serial entrepreneur? And I said, someone who fails a lot. I know about failing. I'm not sure if I yet know that I fail better. Sirens right now is not trying to make money. In a certain sense, I often like to say a startup is like a book. You have to spend several years working on it before you can even publish it and start making money doing it.
But do you have a
but there is a business model.
Projected business case?
Yeah, the business case is basically a kind of arrogant one, which is that a lot of big brands are fascinated about the future, whether you're a consumer electronics company like Samsung, or a massive Swiss or Munich-based reinsurance company. You have to figure out what's going on in the future, and typically they hire economists, social scientists, technologists to try to tell them about the future. But I believe that the future is not something that just happens to us and that you dispassionately predict. The future, we make the future. And I think especially writers and artists imagine futures and then technologists make it. There's a guy I know, an Australian guy, but he was working for Google Creative Labs in Paris for a long time. He's now back in Australia, and he mentioned to me that half the engineers at the Google X lab, which is the project that does the driverless cars and the balloons, delivering the internet and all kinds of other things, are simply trying to make things that they read about in William Gibson novels. H.G. Wells was the first person to imagine a credit card. And so we believe that basically these companies will pay us to tell them about the future, will pay us to teach them how to make an ad that imagines what people will do in hotel rooms in 2022.
Terrific answer. Thank you very much, Richard Nash.